My name is Carrie Garzinski. I am the Regional Vice President of the American Wine Society of Colorado. And I want to say thank you for joining us today and welcome. We have a plethora of states with us. We have Colorado, Arizona, Wisconsin, New York, Illinois, Minnesota, North Carolina. I'm sure there are others. I just don't have you all on my list. I want to mention that if you have a question, please put it in the chat box and we will definitely read that and get that out there and have Jasper or Nora answer those questions. So I also want to put a little plug in. The American Wine Society of Colorado is having another tasting, a Bosnian wine tasting May 16th and a Fopiano tasting May 21st. If you want more information, email me after we have our tasting here. So without further ado, I want to welcome Jasper Ratz from Longridge and Nora Hudson and Giles Thomas from Baobab Wines. So dazzle us.
Thanks,
all
Karen.
Yours.
I appreciate it, and I think firstly a big thank you to the American Wine Society for hosting this, and it's great to take part in this and just share the Longridge story with a wider audience. And just scrolling through all the faces I see, there's a lot of familiar faces, a lot of old friends, and hopefully some new friends as well, because there's a lot of interest in this tasting, which is fantastic. A little bit about Baobab Wines. I moved here from South Africa 4 years ago, set up a business to import and distribute South African wines, to really bring through the story about South Africa, the true story about South Africa. And I've been working with Longridge for 4 years because that's what they do. They do things the right way. They make fantastic wines. They are probably the premium biodynamic estate in South Africa as well. And what Jasper has done since he's been on the estate for the last sort of 11 years, I think it is, has been fantastic. And for him to tell that story and share that story and how that translates into the wines that we're going to taste as well, is I think just a fantastic opportunity, and it's great to see you all. So I'm going to pass over to Jasper and Nora. I'm going to try and read questions as they come up and try and sort of ask those of Jasper and Nora as we go through this, so they're not interrupted by looking at the chat. And just try and keep things moving as quickly as possible. And we're going to start with the bubbles in the next few minutes. So if people have the bubbles and they want to open those up and start drinking, or if you have any Longridge wine, feel free to open up and get cracking with it. I think that's maybe just to start, you could just give everyone a little bit of a background to the estate and the history of the estate and what Longridge is all about.
Hello to everyone. It's good to see a few familiar faces and some family on the group as well. Just a quick bit of history on Longridge. The estate have been going from 1841. As Charles pointed out, sort of roughly over the last 10 years, we've changed the ways we farm and that we make wine completely. I think a small revolution really that took place here, stylistically and otherwise. We are considered one of the leading wine estates in the Stellenbosch area. For those of you that's not familiar with Stellenbosch, I guess it's fair to say that Stellenbosch is a bit like Napa is to California. We have it's the second oldest town in South Africa. It's also where the university two wine schools in Stellenbosch. One at the university and the other one at agricultural college. Varietals, of course, Chenin Blanc is popular everywhere, but Stellenbosch makes some good examples. I think we are also probably the Chardonnay capital, and definitely Cabernet Sauvignon. And then, of course, our own local Pinotage that we're going to taste and talk about a little bit later. We are situated to the south of Stellenbosch and very close to the Atlantic Ocean. So there's a bay approximately 2.5 miles as a crow flies from where our vineyard is situated. And that is called False Bay. And False Bay is Atlantic Sea, Atlantic Ocean. So it's very cold water. And it plays a very important role for us, because if it warms up during the summer days, late morning, you start feeling the cool sea breezes blowing in from the bay into the farm and cooling down the vineyards. This is very, very good for us, because it allows for us to have a very good sort of exposure, acidities, we have a second feature that is also important here, and that is the mountain right behind us. So we're on the foothills of this mountain, and it's called Helderberg, which means bright mountain in Afrikaans. And it's straight in the way of the ruling southeasterlies. But of course, temperature-wise, it also plays an important role, because at nighttime you get a cool air that runs down the mountain, and we get a second cooling effect at nighttime going through the vineyard. So we have good differences between day and nighttime temperatures. I think that's enough for a quick summary and about us and where we are. A little bit more, I guess, on what we do a bit later. But give to Nora now for the public.
Thanks. Thank you, Jasper. And hello, everyone. It's wonderful to see some faces that I know. I almost want to pick a tear. I'm glad you could all be here. So without keeping you any longer, I think it is time that we taste some wine. So today we're going to start off with our Longridge Method Cup Classique. Ooh, there you go. And it's a non-vintage brut. Now, I know that you are probably quite familiar with Prosecco and all the different bubblies that you get all over the world, and obviously the French champagne. In South Africa, you have two different classifications. Sparkling wine, which would be when it is inoculated with gas. It can be in tank. And then Method Cup Classique would be the traditional champagne method, a secondary fermentation in the bottle. And that is what we do at Longridge. You know, we try to do everything as much as we possibly can the old way. And here our Method Cup Classique is a blend of Chardonnay, 80%, and 20% Pinot Noir. And we do a secondary fermentation in the bottle. What is interesting about our Cup Classique, which is probably very different to most Cup Classiques or French champagnes in the non-vintage style that you will find, is the fact that our Cup Classique spends at least 40 to 45 months on the lees. Now that means that is almost equal to a French vintage champagne, which is not something that is usually done. But because we make such a small quantity and we really do it for special occasions and to share, so that people can share with friends and family and not mass production, we decided to make it proper. So what happens with the Cup Classique grapes, the Chardonnay and the Pinot Noir, gets harvested a little bit earlier than the rest of our vintage, about 2 weeks before we start our harvest in February, late January, beginning February. We actually start with the Cup Classique grapes, and everything here is hand-riddled. So hand-riddled and zero dosage, so no extra sugar added to the fermentation. So what you will find with the Cup Classique, on the nose, you'll see that it's got some really nice green, I always find nice green apple and quite a little bit of citrus characteristics on the nose. And when you actually take it on the palate, and you swirl it around a little bit, you get that beautiful biscuity yeastiness and the fine, fine bubble, which is so typical of a good Cup Classique. We find that the best way to enjoy this is with oysters. Luckily, we are very fortunate to have a huge supply of oysters here from the West Coast right through to Plettenberg Bay. So we're very spoiled with oysters. And the Longridge Cup Classique always comes out when oysters are around. Please, if there's anyone that's got questions, you are very welcome to just send a little message and we will answer as we go.
And Nora, maybe you can expand as well on some of the other Cup Classiques that you make on the estate as well, because obviously we're tasting this one, but some other interesting ones that you make.
The other Cup Classiques, what ons het. Okay, so I don't unfortunately have labels here to show you, but we also have a really, really nice non-vintage Brut Rosé, which is a Pinot Noir. Absolutely delicious. It's got more raspberry, little bit of, you know, those raspberry strawberry characteristics, but also totally dry, zero dosage, also on the lees for 42 to 45 months. And then my absolute favorite, but only on special occasions, we do a vintage Brut Reserve. And the current vintage reserve is 2014. Absolutely amazing. It's a Blanc de Blanc, extremely nice biscuity yeastiness, beautiful round. Absolutely. If you would put that in a blind tasting together with French vintage champagnes, I don't think you will find much of a difference. And we've actually seen that in Hong Kong, where the people are very, very keen on drinking French champagne, that our Cup Classique, even the non-vintage as well as the vintage reserve, has done extremely well in blind tastings where we were actually able to go through in blind tastings as a French champagne. And you know, people were guessing it wrong every time. Giles, I wonder, would there be anyone that would like to maybe ask a question or give some feedback on the Cup Classique?
Yeah, I've got one question here from Laurie, who just wanted more clarification on a non-vintage Brut and what the term non-vintage actually means.
Okay. Yeah, so you know, the benchmark for this style of wine obviously is champagne, and I would say probably 95% of French champagne is non-vintage. The reason for that is that champagne houses and Longridge is no different. You try to create a house style that people know if they buy your champagne, if they buy your MCC, as we call it, the Method Cup Classique, that they can expect a certain style of wine. To achieve that, you sometimes blend different vintages of base wine together before it goes into the bottle for the second fermentation. And then during that fermentation, of course, there's more sugar that gets transformed into alcohol, but the byproduct is CO2, and that's where the bubbles, of course, comes from. A vintage should really only be used if you have something very special, a special year, a special vintage that is extraordinary and that deserves to be kept completely on our own. So when we feel we have a vintage like that, we will select the best part, the best parcels of that, the best cuvee, and bottle that separately, and then and as Nora pointed out, we'll keep it for at least 5 years before we will release it.
That's great. Thanks, Jasper. Appreciate that. We're going to move on to the Chenin Blanc next. And I think just before we move on to that, obviously there's a fascinating story about Steen as well, which I think will be a good story to tell around the Chenin. But also in line with that, really just a lot of the feedback I get from wines from South Africa is people think this is a new thing, but South Africa hasn't been making wines for as long as they have. So maybe a crash 2-minute history of South African winemaking would be great if you could offer that, and then maybe a little bit around the Steen as well before we try the Chenin Blanc.
Giles, you're asking difficult questions for 9:15 on a Saturday evening.
They're just going to get
but I think we've got Brad Pitt on the group as well, so I will answer it. Yeah, so the Cape of Good Hope was settled in 1652 by the Dutch, and the reason for it was that they needed a refueling place for their ships that was on the spice route coming from the east back to Europe, around the tip of Africa. And the journey was too long to do it in one go in terms of fresh food and water and wine and things that they needed to endure the journey. So a chap by the name of Jan van Riebeek, he came with his first crew. They immediately started planting vegetable gardens and a vineyard. And by 1659, the first wine was made in the Cape. So although we are grouped in with the New World in loose terms, we probably, in terms of our history, should be an old world producer of wine. Having said that, the Dutch, I think, was much better at distillation than at winemaking. So the brandies was very good, but the wines was not so great. And it was only in about 1670 when the French Huguenots came to South Africa that I think the wine industry really took off and quality wine started being produced. So we had all these immigrants, but like the USA, immigrants from various parts of the world that came here. But as far as the European destinations at the time was largely Dutch and French. And the French Huguenots fled France for religious purposes. They were Protestants, and Holland was a safe haven for them. They also got given a passage here and land if they were prepared to come to Africa and produce whatever they needed at the time. So yeah, one of the first grapes, the first grape that came in with them was Chenin Blanc, and we believe that the reason for that was the Dutch ships had shallow hulls, so that they could sail up the dikes and in the canals and things of Amsterdam and all the cities in Holland. That enabled them to also sail up the Loire River in France from, I think it's Nantes at the mouth, and they could go up to collect vine cuttings that they brought back here. And those, if you know the grapes that's grown in a sort of in that part of the Loire Valley. It's the white grape is Chenin Blanc, and the red grapes is Cabernet Franc. If you think about Savagnier and Vouvray and Saint Louis and those areas along there, and yeah, that's how Chenin Blanc first came came to us. We now have more Chenin Blanc than anybody else in the world. And I think it's very exciting. It's an exciting grape. It's amazing wines that can be produced from it. We know that years ago in the States, a lot of Chenin was produced at high volumes in the Central Valley, and a lot of that went to wine in a box kind of stuff. But there is a few good producers in the state as well. Dry Creek is one of them in Northern California, Sonoma. That I know and that I'm aware of, but it's sort of become, I think, Africa's own white variety, and for the last 25 years, a lot of producers have focused on that grape and pushed the limit on it, and really have been producing world-class, amazing wines. It is one of the noble varieties, and it's very suitable to our climate because it has a natural high acidity. Now, for those of you that are familiar with the French ones that I mentioned before, will know that they either balance that acidity with some residual sugar, or you have to leave it for quite a good few years to come round for that acidity to mellow out and for the wines to be enjoyable. They can be quite racing and very tight in their youth. But because we have a lot more sunlight here and warmer summers, that acidity is very tempered, but at the same time, it also the wines don't really need added acidity to achieve the freshness. So yeah, with that natural acidity, it's just perfect for our climate, and I guess that's why it's also so popular here.
Thanks, Jasper. Nora, you got to take us through the Chenin?
Yes, I am. Okay, so I'm quite excited because if I have it correct, not everyone has the same vintage of Chenin Blanc in front of them. I hear there might be some people with an older vintage. We are currently on the 2018, but there might be some of you that's got 2016 or 17. There might even be someone with a 14 or a 15. What have we got there? Kathy, what did you show? I can't see the vintage.
I mean, Lauren is telling us that she's lucky to got the 2014, and so we know
right.
wine ages. So
no,
fantastic. Well, I'm actually quite excited about that because this is going to show, well, some of us, and hopefully there will be good feedback, what a beautiful aging potential our Chenin Blanc has got. And I just quickly want to mention to you, because I think this is very important, we cannot state it on our bottle as yet in the United States, but at Longridge we farm 100% organic and biodynamic, which means there is no pesticides or herbicides used in the vineyards. And as far as the cellar goes, there is no added enzymes, only the natural native yeasts that are used for fermentation, and no fining, you know, that type of thing is just not happening in our cellar. So everything is very, very naturally made. And sometimes you'll even find a little bit of sediment, you know, in the bottle of the bottle. But that is because we rather stick to the old way of making wine. So I just wanted to let you get a nice sniff of that very, very typical Chenin Blanc characteristic. Now, I've got the 2018, and what I pick up is a lot of beautiful green, fresh citrus. There's some white stone fruit coming through for me. but then that beautiful, vibrant acidity on the mid palate and a really nice lingering aftertaste. Now, we do ferment our Chenin Blanc in the last few years in concrete eggs. Giles, I wonder if you've... And then also some very seasoned barrel fermentation. Giles, have you got a photograph of the concrete eggs? They look like Sputniks. I just want everyone to see them.
Hopefully everyone can see that shot that I've just put up.
I can maybe just come in there and say that you know, the reason for these eggs is that they provide a very amazing fermentation kinetics because they are round shaped or oval shaped like an egg. During fermentation, you get a lot of the lees in suspense. So your yeast autolysis already starts during fermentation, and you get this very nice creamy sort of mouthfeel on the wines, but with incredible freshness. And although the structure of the wine is almost like a barrel fermentation, it obviously doesn't have any oak influence. The balance of the wine is fermented in 500-liter panchons, so they big old barrels and well seasoned, and it's especially for our Chenin Blanc. I just love what those big sized barrels do for the wines. And so at the end, then we blend it together again until we're happy with the portions, and yeah, that's how they come about. Giles, did you want me to also speak at this stage about the other Chenin that we're making?
Yeah, I think there's actually a question here as well about Steen, and is Chenin Blanc Steen. So I think telling the story about Steen as well, it's a good opportunity.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Bruce Springsteen, so that's why we call that wine the Steen. Not really. There's a few sort of legends about where that name comes from. It's the local word for Chenin Blanc is Steen, and we one version is that because of a lot of the Chenin vineyards around the Stellenbosch area is planted on this decomposed granite gravels that and it can be very stony, very rocky, and the word for stone, if you want, is Steen. That was one of the reasons for it. The other one is that for a long time, people, were not quite sure what this grape was that most of the white wines were made of, and somewhere somebody thought it might be a German variety, and the German Stein wines, that a lot of people know. So that Stein eventually in the mouth of the people became Steen, and until they eventually could prove 100% that what they thought might be a German variety is in fact 100% Chenin Blanc. So there's those two stories about it. Yeah, so our other wine that we make from Chenin Blanc is called Steen, and that means old Chenin Blanc, really. And this is a single vineyard wine that is produced of a very old vineyard. This vineyard is certified as a heritage vineyard. So I think South Africa is the first country and the only one at the moment that has an actual certification system for old vineyards. You know, if you're a French producer, you can put VA on your label, and it's basically your choice if you want to do that or not. But we are regulated. You get certification for it. The history is traced back. The exact planting date. There's records of all of them in South Africa. But of course, as a vineyard gets older, the production comes off, and less grapes are produced every year, until it sort of actually becomes almost not economical to farm with that vineyard anymore. However, some of them just produce amazingly characterful wines. That's just shows class that you know, a winemaker can't produce no matter what he does. It's just different fruit. It's just really special and amazing fruit. And so to save that vineyard, we started producing the single vineyard wine from there. It's quite expensive because you know, otherwise we'll simply be losing money farming that land. But it has in a short time really gained a lot of fans, and it's almost a wine that's on consignment now. Giles gets a few cases every year, and it's probably a little bit more sort of in a Vouvray style, for those of you that know that. So there's a little bit more residual sugar on it, definitely, than this one, but it also has an incredible acidity that balances that, and a wine that I think goes perfectly with spicier foods. You guys that have you know, some nice Mexican dishes or some spicier stuff, chili con carne, or for those of you that enjoy curry, it's great to go with that. Actually, Chenin Blanc in general can handle spicy food very, very well. Even wasabi just handles spicier foods. One of the best varieties that I've experienced with it.
Yes, but thanks for expanding on that. I think, you know, for a lot of people, the Chenin Blanc is what people are excited about out of South Africa right now. So I think it's good for everyone to hear about it, and especially the different styles. And if anyone has interest in the wines that Jasper was just talking about, they're welcome to send us a message. We can tell you where you can get them. They are on limited allocation, but there's a few places around that you can get them. Okay. We had a couple of questions on soils, Jasper, and what soils do to the wines, just before we move on to the Emily. And I thought it could be a good chance maybe just to talk about the state that you found the vineyard in when you arrived in sort of 2009, and then that transition into biodynamic practices and the results that you saw to the soils in general, and how that's kind of changed what you're getting from the vines as well. Maybe we just talk about that for a couple of minutes before we move on to the Emily.
Yeah, you know, our philosophy, I guess, here is that, you know, we without soil, we are nothing. Without our soils, we don't have grapes. And sadly, farmers in many countries, most places, take a lot out of the soil, but don't put a lot in. Anyway, not necessarily good things are put back into the soil. And we've seen, you know, I've seen many examples of that in Puy-Fumé, where I was working in France. They can't even feed the cover crops that you know, if you take a vineyard out, you plant a cover crop. Say, for example, it's lucerne, and then for, say, 2 years or so, the soil is rested, and then a new vineyard is planted. The copper levels, for example, there was so high that it was unhealthy for animals to eat that lucerne, or to work it back into the soil. So it had to be cut off, and then we had to burn it, so that because it sucks some of that copper out of the soils. So we, I mean, Longridge is where we are situated. The soil type in general is a decomposed granite soil, which is a fantastic soil to grow wine grapes on. And the name comes from the fact that we are lying on a ridge that runs down the mountain. And over the millennia, the topsoils and the nice soils have washed off those ridges and gone into the valleys. And there it's very fertile. It's actually good places to grow vegetables rather than grapes. So where the vineyards are planted on the ridge here, they battle. They really struggle. It's a leaner soil. It's got great minerality from the granites and the decomposed granites, and it's also ends on the subsoil that is essentially clay, that in some places are quite high in iron content. But it's also good. We love that fact because we want our roots to go deep and to reach that clay, because there's always moisture in those clays. Giles here, you were actually also asking, so what we've found. Yeah, so we were not any 10 years ago, we were no different from many of the other, well, most of the other farms around the area. Herbicides have been used for a long time to control weeds, supposedly, to take the competition plants away. And then for fertilizer, there was a synthetic fertilizers used that gives you a lot of a lot of nitrogen, some potassium, and some what is kalium in NPK. Anyway, the stuff that are being sold in the hundreds, thousands of tons in agriculture all around the world. It's a product that got developed after the Second World War. And yeah, so a lot of, you know, I can keep you busy the whole night with this, but essentially every time after a big war, all these factories that was producing ammunition and weapons and so forth had to be put to use for producing something else. And so agrochemicals was a easy shoe-in for those factories, and farmers got made to believe that you needed those chemicals to improve your crops and to be a better farmer and to get more crops off the same land. But in the long run, we've really screwed our soils up completely. We've lost the microorganisms in our soils, and our soils have lost the ability to keep and hold water, so the water holding capacity have dropped down. The fertilizers that were put on the vines were like a shot in the vein, just to keep that plant going again for a little bit more, and the plants became more susceptible to diseases and to infections, and for that, of course, the agrochemical companies produced a great solution, of a systemic spray that you then spray, and you nuke the whole story, and so the cycle continues. Make no mistake that a lot of that stuff that are sprayed on the vines and end up on the grapes survive the process and end up in the bottle. Now, if you think back to the story of the Cape of Good Hope 350 odd years ago, the reason they produced wine was healthy for you. Doctors prescribed wines. It was a good thing to consume, and it should still be. But we have to be really careful. I think nowadays with the wines, a lot of people have complications with certain wines and certain reactions due to the chemical used in it. And it's not just sulfite. Sulfite's just one of them. There's a whole lot of other things that you can take on board as well. So to come back to the Longridge story, our soils we found very much like that as well. And we then decided that if we still want to be here 50 years from now, and these wines continue, we need to change the way we treat our soils drastically. And we started off by taking away all the chemicals that was used. No more herbicides was used on the soils. We brought in line with the biodynamic way of thinking and farming. We brought animals back on the farm: cows, chickens, ducks, horses. They all fulfill an important role on the farm. But the main thing about the cows were that they were producing manure, and from this manure is one of the main ingredients of the composts. And so we produce our own compost, and that is filled with microorganisms. We work that into the soil, and ultimately you are aiming to get humus on your topsoil and basically build your topsoil again with good, healthy humus. Yeah, so there's lots more I can say about it, but in a nutshell, that's what we changed, Charles, and we can see amazing results in our soils, in our plant health, in the immune systems of our plants. And the water holding capacity of the soil is significantly higher than it used to be, or that our neighbors' soils are.
Thanks, Jasper. I appreciate it. And about 8 minutes on YouTube. I'm just going to put it into the chat now. So if anyone wants to see more about the soils and the farming, I'll just put that in, and people can watch that at their leisure. I think, can we move on to the Emily? Obviously, the Emily is a special wine. Great story behind it, and a good one to talk about now.
Okay, so I'm going to start on the Emily. This is probably one of our best sellers globally, and it's got a beautiful story. Not only the name, but also how this wine got to exist. This is a blend of Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, and you know, we do make Cup Classique on the farm, and when the base wines are fermenting, what basically happened is that the fermentation got stuck, and a friend of ours, one of our distributors, were visiting the farm and suggested to Jasper that he makes a still wine from this Cup Classique blend that they were busy making. So they decided to put the Emily in a bottle as a still wine. And so what you will find when you taste this wine is that the acidity is a little bit higher. It's very crispy, very much like our Cup Classique, but in a still form. And what we've also done on the label, you'll see the label is very much the same as the Method Cup Classique. And what we've actually done on the label is we've actually started calling it a Cuvée Classique, so that the vintage is, because basically every year our Emily is in the same style. I just quickly want to tell you about the story of where the Emily got its name. Emily Hobhouse was a British-born lady who in the late 1900s, when we had the Anglo-Boer War, she came to the country, and the British soldiers were taking all the women and children into custody in probably the first concentration camps as the world know concentration camps. And they were kept in really, really bad conditions. And Emily Hobhouse came to the country. She was, you know, of the more elite part of Britain, and she saw the horrific conditions and was very, very upset about it. And what she did is she tried to get the world to see what was happening in South Africa. And she was actually named a traitor by Britain because she tried to help the Boer families for better conditions. And we decided, with Jasper having gone to school in Bloemfontein, where the War Museum is, and where Emily, where her, you know, there's a whole museum for Emily, and we decided that we wanted to honor her memory, and that's why we called this Emily. So it's got a beautiful name to go with. I think you'll see it's nice and fresh, it's crispy, it's a beautiful summertime wine, and you going into your summer, but also with a very good acidity structure. So really a stunning wine to have with any type of dish. And we've even found that at the end of the year, and when you've got Thanksgiving, this is a perfect accompaniment for turkey. So any feedback would appreciate on the Emily.
Thanks, Nora. I appreciate that. We're going to, I want to cover off one more thing, and then we're going to move on to the pinotage. I want to make sure that we cover off all 4 wines before the turn of the hour, and then there's a few questions here as well that we sort of go through, and then if people need to drop off, they can drop off. One thing, Jasper, just before we move on to the Emily, we were talking about, you know, what Longridge does from a biodynamic viewpoint, and I know that you were invited by Hennessy back in February to be part of a panel to talk about the future of biodynamic farming. And maybe you could just cover off a little bit about what that panel was, and, you know, from a global viewpoint, you know, where you see biodynamic farming and organic wines moving in the next sort of 5, 10, 20 years.
Yeah. So this was at Vin Expo in Paris, and Moet Hennessy hosted this panel discussion that sort of happened over 3 days, and I guess the focus of the forum was to say, you know, we've got this climate change that's taking place, weather patterns are changing, and what is the impact of this on the wine industry, and what can we do about it? How should we adapt to it? You know, some climatologist was included in the panel. Some very clever professors studying the impact of climate change on Earth, on the oceans, etc. There were some viticulturists, Professor De Leeuw from the Bordeaux University, and then so I had to really speak on organic and biodynamic practices, what the difference is, and also, you know, how whether that has a role to play in this whole discussion. And I think it has a hugely important role to play, because our problem is too much carbon in the atmosphere. And if you have organic material, so grasses or any kind of plants, the organic content of your soil, as that increases, as it goes up, the soil's ability to bind carbon from the atmosphere into the soil improves dramatically. And so I think agriculture can actually have an incredible impact on reversing the effects that we've seen of climate change so far, and really cleaning up the planet if we start farming like they did 200 years ago or even 100 years ago, by bringing in organic material again into the soil, start to get away from synthetic fertilizers, get away from the herbicides that's being sprayed that kills the microorganism, that kills the earthworms, you know. And there's hundreds of thousands of pounds of topsoil that gets blown away in the USA every year, or that gets washed down into the rivers and out on the ocean every year. And so it's you know, it's a very big issue, I think, in the USA as well, that can be addressed. So there's a change where cereal farmers, maize farmers stop tilling the soils. They start planting the new crop into the residues of the previous crop, where the old roots stay in there. They keep the soil in one place, and eventually, you know, your structure of the soil improves and develops again. But it was very interesting for me to hear all these experts speak on their various fields, you know, and most importantly, I think it is the Yale professor at the Singapore campus. They have a branch or a university there as well. She's actually American, although she's Asian and you know, from birth, and teaches there now. You know, and two of them, they say that amongst the academics, there is absolutely, or respected academics, there is no doubt that climate change is taking place and rapidly, and that it's brought about by man. So according to them, there's no doubt about that.
Thanks, Jasper. Appreciate that. A lot of really interesting comments coming through on the Emily, which doesn't surprise me because that wine always takes people a little bit by surprise. But we'll maybe come to those afterwards and talk about the love child of Pinot Noir and Cinsault. Or are you gonna take us through this wine?
Yeah, just filling our glasses.
And I think for a lot of people, Nora, if you can cover off the history of Pinotage as well, how it came to be.
I'm going to quickly do that. Okay, so again, here people might have different vintages. There might be a few 2016s or 17s around. We are on the 2018, which actually won quite a lot of awards, which was an interesting for the style of wine that this was made in. Which is a little bit different to what the rest of South Africa thinks a Pinotage should taste like. But at Longridge, Pinotage is definitely one of our cultivars that we can really say is something that year and year again shows the beautiful character of what this soil and this terroir can bring. So the history of Pinotage is very interesting. Professor Pierrot I think it was in the 60s, late 70s. In the 1930s, he started developing a new grape variety and the reason for developing Pinotage, there were two reasons. Firstly, he wanted a grape variety that could handle, that would be less disease or more disease resistant than Pinot Noir, but something in that same style. And then he also wanted a grape variety that could actually take the South African sun and the heat, because we've got a lot of warmer areas where Pinot Noir, which is a cool climate cultivar, does not really do well. So he cross-pollinated Pinot Noir and Cinsault, or what we would also call Hermitage, and therefore the name Pinotage, from Pinotage and Hermitage, or from Pinot Noir and Hermitage. So in the beginning, the wine that was made from Pinotage was definitely made like the really full-bodied reds. In the old days, the South African reds were all over-extracted, over-wooded, really quite hectically heavy wines. And they tried to work the Pinotage exactly the same way, which resulted in some, if I may say with respect, a few disasters, I think, because it tasted often like burnt rubber and banana, and very often people say, oh, just not Pinotage. Well, I think we've come a long way since then. There's a few guys that have really put some amazing landmark Pinotages on the map. And if I may say so, I think we are one of them. We've got an ultra premium Pinotage, which is called the Moon Dance, which we only made 900 bottles of. But our Pinotage is, especially for the 2018, in a very, if I may say, Pinot Noir-like style, because you're going to get some really beautiful berries, red berries, cassis characteristics, but then with that little touch of smokiness on the mid-palate, which is very typical to Pinotage, and a beautiful, beautiful lingering aftertaste. Definitely something you can mature for 6 to 8, 10 years. The 2017, if there's anyone that's got the 17 on hand, that's going to be a little bit more smoky, but beautiful, well-rounded, and actually starting to only now tasting like it's getting into its own, you know, building its character. So I really think, as far as Pinotage goes in South Africa, very often the commercially friendly Pinotages that we find here is dark chocolate coffee, very juicy, full, I can almost say manly Pinotages, where I think our Pinotage, you know, is more elegant. It's got beautiful fresh fruit or juiciness, if I can say that. And then I would just like to also mention, and it was the only Pinotage that actually got a double platinum at the national wine competition, and it was under the top 100. So the 2018 as well as the 2017 has done extremely well in competitions, and I would really love to see some more people, our friends in the United States, to actually carry the Pinotage around to barbecues and enjoy it, because this is a wine that you can really enjoy with some nice smoky barbecue food as well. It goes really well, and I think very palatable.
Giles, if I can maybe just add and also want to make it clear that there's nothing wrong with the more traditional style of Pinotage that is called, you know, more oaky, more structure, more tannins. There's a place for that, and there's some very good producers of that style. But because well, two reasons. I personally are a big Pinot Noir fan. I love Pinot Noir, and I love to make it and drink it and grow it. And I was not a very big fan of Pinotage for some of the reasons that Nora might have pointed out. But because we are the coolest sub-region in Stellenbosch, we and Longridge had a very good reputation for Pinotage as well. We decided that we're going to reinvent our Pinotage to A, get a point of difference, but B, for me to sort of live out my Pinot Noir fantasies in a certain way. So we've really embraced that side of it, and stylistically, that's what we go for. It will taste different, of course, from Pinot Noirs. Although this wine have been sort of been the joker or the pirate in blind tastings of Pinot Noirs quite a few times, and have surprised people because it finished up in the top 3. I think we are still every year refining our style and slowly but surely, I think, moving more towards greater elegance yet, and finer tannins yet, and approachability, but to find intensity without size, and that is the challenge. And I think you can really work towards having a very intense wine with depth, but not necessarily bigger is better, and those finer nuances is what we strive for with this one.
Now, I think for me, definitely achieved that. Yeah, like you, I've never been a big fan of Pinotage, and this one is different. And if I just look at the comments coming through now, I think a lot of people are pleasantly surprised by the style of this Pinotage, just based on what they're saying. Cara, can we take a few more questions? I know we want to try and keep this to an hour, but there's a few questions we haven't covered off, so if we've got time, that'll be good. I think just going back to the Emily, there was a lot of questions around the Emily. Maybe you could just touch more on the initial fermentation process, specifically on the Chardonnay.
Yeah. So, Charles, as Nora pointed out, it's effectively almost champagne without the bubbles in a way. So we're certainly not trying to get to make Chardonnay in a traditional form. We make a Chardonnay already. So that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to make something really unique, a blend that are traditionally found in bubbles, but without that. So the Chardonnay portion of it is totally fermented in stainless steel, and I've got no wood influence whatsoever. Only that we're going for freshness, and try to look for tightness. We don't want the alcohol on this wine to run away either, and then that small portion of Pinot Noir in there gets the full Pinot Noir treatment. It's fermented on its skins. It gets we aim with that portion, as things have evolved, to make a seriously good Pinot Noir, and then we age that for a year or two until we satisfied with what we have, and then we blend small portions of that back into the Chardonnay section, and that's where that slight blush color comes from. The French have quite a nice term for it. They call it Eau de Bedrie, and the eye of the partridge, and it's just got that little touch of pink to it, or salmon, I should say. Is it making sense? Cinso. Yes, I saw the question there about Cinso. So I make a small, about 4 wines that we call the Jasper Raats range of wines. These are varieties outside of the Longridge focus. So in Longridge, as you know, we focus on Chenin Blanc, Chardonnay on the white side, and on the red side is Pinotage, Merlot, and Cabernet Sauvignon. That's the main focus. And then we have an ultra premium range that sits above that, which includes a single vineyard Chardonnay, the Ostian that we talked about, a sort of right bank Santamino style Bordeaux blend called the Ecliptico, which Jeff usually sells a hell of a lot of. They're famous in Chicago. And then we also have this single vineyard ultra premium Pinotage, and then also a Pomerol motivate or inspired wine called the Mystery. But on the Jasper Raats range of wines, I make a single vineyard Sauvignon Blanc that is in a very, very sort of unique style. I make a Pinot Noir, I make a Cinso, and Sangiovese, and recently, and that Cinso is also produced from a very old vineyard. It's bush vines, so they're not trellised. And whoever asked about Cinso must know something a little bit about South Africa, because there was a time when, again, South Africa had more Cinso than anybody else in the world. And there's the variety is making a resurgence. There's a few producers that have sort of broken the mold, I think, and have gone outside the box and have said, like, let's make single varietals with Cinso. And I, for one, is very happy about that. You know, it's lovely, silky, lighter style reds. Just you can have beautiful sort of strawberry and mulberry flavors in that wines. They age fantastically, and as they get older, they become you know, that sort of mushroom forest floor character evolves. But they age incredibly well, and but when they're young, they can be very very nice to drink. It's on a warm summer's day when you don't feel like that big red, but you sort of want to switch over from your white to red. There's few things nicer than a good Cinso.
Jasper, just a question here, which I think is probably pertinent and everyone wants to know about, is the drought. So obviously there's a lot of global attention on the drought that affected the Cape over the last few years. And although it's not as bad as it was, I think it's nice for people to know where South Africa is now, and some of those stories that you have about, you know, how you fared through the drought as well would be nice.
Yeah, I think maybe that movie that was made called Invictus. Is there a few hands that anybody saw Invictus, the movie? A few of you. Matt Damon plays in the leading role, and it's a movie about when South Africa won the Rugby World Cup, and Nelson Mandela was still president. Quite a good movie, a nice movie to see. Yeah, I'm thinking. I was thinking as Charles was speaking about the drought, that after Invictus, the next most well-published and marketed event for South Africa was probably that drought. Only surpassed by the coronavirus, I think, in terms of publicity. But anyway, yeah, thankfully that drought is over now. We are back to normal rain. I still think you in lots of places you can see the effect of that still on the vineyards, especially the older vineyards, and you know, where the soils are anyway kind of dead. Yeah, you can certainly still see that. You know, as with any event that happens, anything negative, there's always positives to take from it as well. One of them was that we had, I think, 3 of the most amazing vintages in that period. 2015 was considered one of the best ever from South Africa. 2017, some of the older producers think, you know, that even surpassed the 15, which they said was the best in 50 years. One of our wines was given 100 points by Tim Atkin in the UK, and it's the first time that have happened. Yeah, so you know, and the 2016 vintage, I think, for Longridge, we had incredible concentration, especially in our red wines. We had much smaller berries and so forth. But you know, and I think the other positive of the drought for us has been that we work. Water became quite a focus for us, and we now work much smarter with our water than we ever did before. We now have all the water that we had before, but we are using probably a third of what we used to. So the irrigation water that we have available now, we use on the paddocks, on the fields where our cows are grazing, more than we are using on our vineyards itself now. We installed neutron probes in our vineyards. So somebody comes, the probe is dropped down, the moisture level of the soil is measured all the way down to about 1.2 meters. What would that be? About 6? No, not 6 feet. Probably about 4 feet, 5 feet, something like that. And then it gets taken back to the office. It's downloaded on the software on the computer, and we can see a graph showing us exactly how where the moisture levels at different depths are at. And so you know exactly how long you should water if you want to fill the profile of the water again in your soil. I think the other big positive for us was that we could actually see a big difference in that our soil was showing to conventionally farmed soils in terms of the way it was keeping and holding on to the moisture that we got. In this drought period, you know, so the Cape, I must just maybe take a step back. The Cape's weather is very much Mediterranean. So we have colder, cooler winters, I should say, wet ones, wet and cool winters. So not nearly as cold as what you guys are used to. But for us Africans, you know, 10 degrees Celsius is cold. We put on all the clothes that we have. But then it's nice, warm spring and summer and so forth. But in that drought time, we had, especially in 2017, I think, and a little bit in 16 as well, we had some showers in an abnormal time, sort of in spring, late spring, and even in early summer. And in 2018, it was also late in summer. And we would see it because we're on a slope. We're on the slope of the mountain here. We could see how water was just streaming out of vineyards because the soil was so hard. It would take up a little bit of water and then be saturated, and the rest would just run off. Whereas with our soils that's alive, and they were like a sponge, they would just suck up all the water and hold on to it. There was absolutely no runoff, no erosion, and for us that was you know, very, very good to see, because we believe that, and we absolutely we do it for that reason. But this was real proof of the success of what we have done. So we were a lot less affected from the drought. We had to adapt certain practices. I think in 2015 we got stung a little bit because we used to have competition plants, or a cover crop, if you want to call that, right through the whole surface of the vineyard floor, and with no water and little rain in 2015, that competition, I think, for water was a bit too high. So we adapted in 2016. We cleaned up the strip right underneath the vines with a mechanical implement that we bought that just cuts the roots off any grasses or clovers or weeds that might grow in that strip. And then we covered that with mulches. That video that Charles was referring to, that you can go have a look on YouTube. It's not long. I think it's 5 minutes. It's really worth a look if you get a good sense of what the place looks like. But everything we're talking about now, you can actually see also what we did there, and we started using different cover crops then to form a mat on the soils to keep moisture in. So our focus moved towards keeping moisture in the soil as much as possible with mulches and with cover crops. Because we have a much cooler soil, because it's never bare, that already helped a lot for us. But in general terms, you can come visit us, and you can now take a shower as well. So yeah.
You weren't allowed to take a shower.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jasper. I think I know a lot of people are probably, including yourselves, it's getting late there. So I'm just going to do one more question before we wrap it up. And I think it's a pertinent question that someone's asked, because it's the question on everyone's lips right now. COVID-19, obviously South Africa's had more drastic measures than pretty much any country in the world, and that's had a massive impact on the wineries as well, especially given the fact that you were harvesting when the shutdown happened. So maybe you can just give us a little bit of background in terms of the restrictions that have been put in place in South Africa, and especially the impact that's had on the wine industry in South Africa.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping you're not going to ask that, Charles. I'm the wrong guy to speak to about this thing. I think it's totally blown out of proportion, and it's ridiculous what's happening to the world. The measures in South Africa was quite draconical. Everything was locked down. The only people that could, or you could only leave your house really to go to shops, or to the doctor or something like that. Fill up your car. Only very few businesses were allowed to continue to function, and you had to be classified as an essential service. Agriculture initially, was part of the essential services, but then a few days later they said, well, the wine industry is not. So there was a lot of people at that stage that still had grapes out in the vineyards and were still busy picking it. There was a huge collective lobbying done with the government, and then in a day or two after that, they again changed and allowed the wine industry to finish their harvest and to continue to do what's necessary in the wineries to finish the wines and to finish the fermentations and so forth. But we were not allowed to sell any wine to anyone, not locally, not exports, and the same thing that was happening to lots of other businesses around the world happened here too. Your income was just completely cut off overnight. Your running costs for running a farm and a winery and all the supporting staff and so forth, continues. There was again a lot of lobbying being done to at least allow exports. Then the government said, right, you're allowed to export now, and a day later they said, but you're not allowed to transport your wines. So effectively that meant no exports because you can't get your wines to the ports. So this lobbying process have continued, and from Monday this week, the export market was opened up for us again. So thankfully, our exports can continue now. But at the same token, I can say there's a rising pressure cooker happening here, where people are quite quickly getting totally fed up with the measures that is being forced on everyone. You, for example, are only allowed to go for a walk or train from, I think, 6 in the morning till 9 o'clock. And at the moment, the sun only rises at about 7:30. So effectively, that's an hour and a half left for people to do that. But more importantly, everybody's very, very, very concerned about our economy, not just our economy, but making ends meet. A lot of people that have built up businesses over years and have put everything into it that they had are now losing their businesses. So I think we are in for dire straits. There was an article in the beginning of the week, a newspaper article where the CEO of Vinpro, one of our industry organizations, was interviewed, and they believe that 60 to 80 wineries, wine producers will not survive the effects of this lockdown. As with many people, it's a matter of cash flow. If you can keep your head above water and keep breathing, so to speak, then I think we will survive. But if that breaks down, then it will be the end. So a lot of people have cut down their costs to the bone. A lot of cases, salaries have been cut. A lot of people have already, as I know in the States, have lost their jobs, and that's very sad. We are a nation of between, I guess, 55 to 60 million people, and I think we've had like 150 or so deaths.
180.
The death toll on the roads over a long weekend is about what we've lives that have been lost to corona over the last 8 or 6 weeks. So people are saying, you know, the price that we're paying for the loss of life that we've seen do not match, the measures do not match the you know, the deep concern for this virus, and therefore they want the choice to go back to work, and the opinion generally is that the compromised people and the elderly should rather you know, be protected and self isolate themselves, and let the healthy earning, you know, and people that can earn go back to work and carry on like that. So yeah, the effects, the long-term effects, I'm not sure of, but I think they will be significant, and I think it will be a few years before a lot of people will recover. Yeah, hopefully, you know, more and more people we see across the world are appreciating South African wines and are falling in love with it, and it's growing, and our exports are growing. So that's very positive, and we hope that that will continue to be the case, and that if nothing else, our exports will pull us through.
Thanks, Jasper. I think it's not the best way to end on a story like that, but it's I think it's important, because obviously it's something that impacts all of us, and the South African wine industry was under so much stress prior to this. I think it's this just isn't going to help. I think, you know, the more people that can discover South African wine and understand what's actually being done there, the better for the industry as a whole, because they are fantastic wines, yours and everything that comes out of South Africa. So I think it's important that people understand that. So I thank you guys for staying up to 10:30 p.m. Is it there?
Yeah.
I think the biggest challenge we find is when we're trying to get together with wineries from the US, is just trying to find that time slot that works for everyone. So it's 1 p.m. here in Colorado, and for you guys to join us at 9 o'clock to 11 o'clock at night, I think is fantastic. So thank you both for doing that. Thanks American Wine Society again. I thank everyone for joining. I think the retailers that have supported us just to get the wines out into people's hands today has been fantastic as well. Kara, I don't know if you want to say anything to close off as well.
Thank you to everybody that joined us. We really appreciate your support during this time. We look forward to bringing more wineries to you from around the world, entertaining, educating, and exploring new fun wines. This will be on the American Wine Society YouTube, so you can check it out and invite your friends and buy more Longridge wines and tell them how amazing and fabulous they are. Thank you so much, Jasper and Nora. Thank you so much, Giles. I really appreciate your support. Thank you guys so much. If you have any questions, please contact me, Jasper, Nora, or Giles. We can help you out, help you find these wines or learn more about Longridge.
Yeah.
With that,
thanks for showing up, and it was nice to talk to you all and have a tasting like this. It's yeah, very, very cool.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Have a great afternoon.